grip of severe toxic smog for 6 days in a row now. And ultrafine dust alerts have been expanded to more areas. As for here in the capital, ultrafine dust warning remains in place. And as you can see on the map, there's really no place to escape from the nasty air if you're in Korea. Well, the Environment Ministry says we could see some better air on Thursday, but let's all keep an eye on the dust levels. But aside from the dust, it's Gyeongchip today, according to Asian calendars. And Gyeongchip means the awakening of hibernating insects and frogs due to the warm spring weather. The temperatures will actually drop a few notches compared to last few days, but will continue to hover above seasonal norms. Meanwhile, Jeju and the southern coastal regions have been seeing light showers since early this morning, and we'll see some rain until noon. Light sprinkles are also expected in the capital area as well in the afternoon, but that's not going to do much to clear the dust away. And for a closer look at today's highs, daily highs will be a couple of notches lower than yesterday. Seoul will only get up to 11 degrees Celsius with a dry weather advisory still remains in place. Well, the dust level should be slightly lower than yesterday, but will continue to hover very bad to bad levels. So be sure to have your face mask handy throughout the day today. And that's all for me at this hour.
Thank you, as always, to our Lee Ji-hyun, who is braving the fine dust for us outside to bring us that report. Now, as we just heard, most of South Korea is choking under its longest ever spell of such high levels of fine dust pollution. The South Korean government has enforced emergency measures for a record 6th consecutive day on this Wednesday. Park Ji-won with more.
The South Korean government has decided to maintain its emergency fine dust reduction measures on Wednesday for the 6th consecutive day. This is the longest ever length of time that such measures have been in effect in South Korea's history. With the nation's air quality at worst ever levels, hundreds of petitions have been submitted to the bulletin board on the website of the President's Office of Cheongwade. Most of the petitions urge the government to consult with the Chinese government to resolve the issue, as China is considered one of the main sources of the nation's air pollutants. Petitions also called for the government to provide financial subsidies for the purchase of air purifiers and other necessary products to deal with the poor air. Against this backdrop, the South Korean government held an emergency vice ministerial level meeting to address the matter on Tuesday. Senior officials from the nation's Trade, Industry and Energy Ministry, Labor Ministry, Environment Ministry, as well as Welfare Ministry joined a video conference between Seoul and the administrative city of Sejong. The meeting examined whether the fine dust reduction measures have been working properly and what more can be done to tackle the air pollution problem. The participants vowed the government will consider every option at its disposal to resolve the matter. Meanwhile, the nation's Environment Minister Jo Myung-rae also said Tuesday during a meeting with reporters the ministry is considering imposing stronger vehicle restrictions to improve air conditions. Under the measures, vehicles with odd number license plates will not be allowed on the roads on even numbered dates and vice versa. Jo added that China and South Korea have recently agreed to exchange fine dust data and to derive possible solutions based on scientific studies. The environment minister said Beijing has acknowledged that fine dust from China is partially responsible for the air pollution in South Korea. He also emphasized a bill has been submitted to the National Assembly to classify fine dust as a social disaster. If the bill is passed by Parliament, Cho said stronger protective measures could be enforced. Park Ji-won, Arirang News.
So looking at the video in Ji-won's report there, and if you're watching us in Korea, you can just look up at the skies here in the country and see how gloomy and smoggy it is. So it shouldn't come as too much of a surprise to learn that South Korea's air pollution is worse than any other country in the OECD. Che Xiang tells us more.
Air pollution in South Korea in terms of ultrafine dust concentration is not only more than twice the OECD average, It's the worst out of the entire group of advanced countries. According to a new OECD report, South Korea recorded an average of 25.14 micrograms of PM2.5 particles per cubic meter in 2017. The OECD average was 12.5. Mexico and Italy were higher than the average, while Germany, France, and the United Kingdom came in below. South Korea's air pollution is also bleak by local weather agency standards. In 2016, South Korea's National Institute of Environmental Research singled out Seoul as the most polluted major urban area among the cities it surveyed. The South Korean capital had the highest ultrafine dust levels at an average of 26 micrograms per cubic meter. That's almost twice as high as other surveyed cities such as London, Paris, Los Angeles, and Tokyo. Those cities range between 12 and 14 micrograms per cubic meter. Local weather experts point to China as the source of the high levels of ultrafine dust in South Korea.
The high levels of ultrafine dust we've been seeing over the last few days here are attributable to China. The particles were blown from there to South Korea.
According to the National Institute of Environmental Research, stagnant wind currents are making the situation even worse as the particles are not dispersed but linger over the peninsula. With air pollution in South Korea looking grimmer than ever, pressure is rising on the government to take more wide-ranging steps to safeguard public health. 최시영, Arirang News.
Let's take a closer look at the health effects of ultrafine dust and what we can do to protect ourselves from its harmful effects. We're happy to have Dr. Christopher Carlston, Head of Respiratory Medicine at the University of British Columbia and Director of the Air Pollution Lab, who's joining us on Skype from just outside of Vancouver. Dr. Carlston, we've been forced to endure this really depressing week of hazardous levels of ultrafine dust in South Korea, between 5 to 8 times what's considered safe. Firstly, can you tell us what fine dust does to the human body and why it's considered so harmful?
Right. Thanks, Mark. I feel for your viewers. I was watching and I really see the problem very graphically. The fine particles are those that are less than 2.5 micron. So they're not visible, each particle, to the naked eye. But of course, you can see on your screens when the particles are all together in a large air mass, you can see the group together. But because they're so small, they get deep into the lung and they can even get into the bloodstream and cause inflammation. That's why these particles are dangerous not only for the lungs, but also for the bloodstream and even the heart. So heart and lung disease, as well as other disease, have all been associated with these particles. The key thing is that most of the effects, thankfully, are long-term. And so while I know your viewers have been suffering for days now, we can hope that it will pass, and I'm sure it will pass, and we can get through this episode. For the short-term effects, which are obviously of the greatest concern right now, I saw the masks, and I think for this kind of exposure scenario, masks are reasonable, but staying indoors is really the best thing you can do if possible.
Okay, and yes, most of us would prefer to be outside enjoying the early spring weather, but of course that isn't advisable, as you say, and I must say we're very jealous of the blue skies we can see behind you. But like you say, during periods like this, is that your advice then? We should stay inside whenever possible, keep the windows shut, have an air purifier going, and if we do go outside for prolonged periods, aside from wearing a face mask, something that's enough to protect you from the finest particles, what are the other best ways to protect yourself?
The other thing when you're outdoors, if you really need to be there, and I understand we do need to be outside for practical purposes, is to minimize the intensity of activity. So the respiratory rate, which is related to how fast you breathe and how deeply you breathe, is a huge factor in terms of how much air pollution gets deep into the lungs. So exercising in these conditions is really not advised. But on the other hand, it's really important to let your viewers know, Mark, that even though I see the pollution and I see the numbers and I see how bad it is, this is not likely to be dangerous for most people for a short period of time. It may make them uncomfortable, but it won't put them at severe risk for most people that don't have pre-existing disease. On the other hand, the elderly and those that have pre-existing lung and heart disease are the ones who should take special care. So it's a fine line between not having excessive amounts of angst and having people completely ruin their daily lives over concern, but at the same time being very careful that, yes, indeed, those that are older, those that have heart and lung disease really should, if at all possible, stay inside and moderate activity.
Okay, well, that's good news for those of us who are relatively healthy, because we don't hear much about that on the local media here. There is a lot of fear and concern, as you say. You're also the director of the Air Pollution Lab, so you're an expert on air pollution. Why do you think the smog and fine dust is just so bad in South Korea at the moment? A lot of people here blame China. Do you think that's an accurate assessment?
Well, I saw those numbers and I was a bit surprised. It was worse than I had realized. So I think it really depends on whether you're talking about long-term averages or short-term averages. The long-term averages, I'm sure, have much to do with South Korea itself and the traffic and the industry in South Korea. But I think these short-term effects like this probably have a lot to do with meteorologic factors, wind and pressure, and indeed the direction of the wind. So on a day or a period, a week or so, or even longer, that the wind is coming from China, well, there's no question that that's going to affect South Korea's air quality. But I think it's just important not to blame China universally year-round, because it's much more complicated than that. So I'm sure China is contributing, but not every day and not all the time. So we have to understand those subtleties a bit.
Okay, well, finally, we'd love to have you on for the full half an hour, to be honest. We've got plenty of questions we'd like to pick your brains about. But if you were to advise the South Korean government about ways to mitigate fine dust, what would you suggest they do? Is it really going to take something drastic to ensure that we aren't subjected to this fine dust for years, decades to come?
Well, as you say, years and decades. I mean, I honestly think, although it is a long-term and more complex solution, global partnerships to reduce fossil fuel use, to curb climate change, things that are very complicated, but I think without doing those, we're going to continue to face these problems and they're going to get worse. Those absolutely have to be high on the government agenda. On the short-term basis, I did hear about possible subsidies to air filters and other things the government can do to lessen the burden on the everyday citizen. And I think that's money very well spent. In the long term, that money is not going to be a ton, but it could help, especially those vulnerable people with heart and lung disease. So I think it's a very smart thing for the government to do.
Okay, Dr. Carlston, go back and enjoy the rest of your skiing vacation. We appreciate you breaking into that to speak to us, and thank you for your insights on the fine dust issue affecting us here in South Korea. Appreciate it.
I wish you the best. Thank you.
Now, in other news, South Korea's intelligence chief briefed lawmakers on Tuesday about the Hanoi summit. He said Seoul and Washington share the same information in regards to North Korea's nuclear facilities, and they are thoroughly monitoring them. Kim Min-ji reports.
South Korea is keeping track of all North Korean nuclear missile-related facilities, including its uranium enrichment sites. This is according to Seo Hoon, the chief of the National Intelligence Service, speaking at a parliamentary briefing on Tuesday. There have been questions surrounding what the U.S. had demanded from North Korea at the Hanoi summit, on top of the shutdown of the Yongbyon nuclear complex. The NIS chief said both Seoul and Washington have the same information on the North's nuclear facilities, but cannot reveal what facilities are located where. Seoul went on to say that North Korea has suspended operations of a 5-megawatt nuclear reactor at Yongbyon, one of the key facilities at the complex, and that no significant movement has been detected in the tunnels at the Punggye-ri test site since Pyongyang blew them up last year. Asked to why the talks fell through, the spy chief said that a deal can only be made when every single agenda item on the table is agreed upon, saying the breakdown is just a process in negotiations. He added that the U.S. wanted a comprehensive plan in regards to the denuclearization process on the Korean peninsula, while North Korea had eyed a phase-by-phase procedure. He said internally North Korea was disappointed that the summit did not bear fruit. When asked whether Chairman Kim Jong-un would be visiting Seoul in the near future, he said that North Korea needs time for internal analysis on the no-deal summit, and now is not the appropriate time for such discussions. Kim Min-ji, Arirang News.
South Korea's top nuclear envoy arrived in Washington Tuesday for talks with his American counterpart Stephen Biegun and other officials. Speaking to reporters upon his arrival, Special Representative for Korean Peninsula Peace and Security Affairs Lee Do-hoon said he will listen to Washington's assessment of the latest North Korea-US summit and how it intends to move forward. He added that he aims to discuss how to maintain the momentum to achieve North Korea's denuclearization after the Hanoi meeting ended prematurely with no deal. The United States says it remains in regular contact with North Korea even after the Hanoi summit ended prematurely and the two sides failed to reach an agreement. During a regular press briefing on Tuesday, U.S. State Department Deputy Spokesperson Robert Palladino said that progress had been made in Hanoi, but no further meetings have been planned yet between the two sides, saying Pyongyang and Washington remain in contact. The spokesperson declined to comment on specific diplomatic channels with North Korea. He added that although Kim and Trump did not reach a deal, the two sides were able to exchange very detailed positions which have narrowed the gap on the number of issues regarding North Korea's denuclearization and corresponding measures from the US. US Secretary of State Mike Pompeo is stressing that Washington is making efforts to fix and correct the grave human rights situation in North Korea. He also defended the Trump administration's diplomatic engagement with North Korea to prevent a possible repeat of a case similar to that of the tragic death of Otto Warmbier. Kim Hyo-sun reports.
The Trump administration is exerting efforts to fix and correct North Korea's atrocious record of human rights abuses. That's according to U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo, who stressed during an interview with Atlanta-based Gray Television on Tuesday that the strategic patience approach taken by the previous Obama administration did not work out. He added there should be no more suffering like the pain Otto Warmbier's family has been forced to endure. The Warmbier case resurfaced in media following President Trump's press conference following the Hanoi summit, in which he said the North's leader did not know about Warmbier's condition until later. Warmbier, an American college student who was imprisoned by the regime, died shortly after returning home in a coma in 2017. The top U.S. diplomat also said he's hopeful about future dialogue with North Korea, despite not being able to reach an agreement in Hanoi.
And so I am hopeful, although I have no commitment yet, that we will be back at it, that I'll have a team in Pyongyang in the next couple of weeks, continuing to work to find those places where there's a shared interest.
Pompeo added that North Korean leader Kim Jong-un should make a strategic decision, explaining the North's current model is not sustainable in the long run. Kim Hyo-sun, Arirang News.
As the US and China are reportedly close to ending their trade dispute, it appears Washington is now kicking off potentially new trade wars elsewhere around the world. For more on this and other news from around the globe, let's turn to our Noah Adam. Adam, President Trump is set to end preferential trade statuses for India and Turkey.
That's right, Mark. The move comes as the Trump administration is trying to fix what it sees as unfair trade practices. The office of the U.S. Trade Representative Robert Lighthizer made the announcement through a statement on Monday. President Trump noted that for India, New Delhi failed to assure the U.S. it would provide reasonable access to its markets. For Turkey, Trump said the country is sufficiently economically developed and no longer qualifies for what is known as a generalized system of preference. That is a U.S. trade program that gives developing countries duty-free access to the American market. Both countries are expected to be removed from the program within 60 days. Turkey's trade minister slammed the move, saying it is inconsistent with the two countries' aim to increase annual bilateral trade to $75 billion. He also said the decision would only harm American SMEs. India's Commerce Ministry, meanwhile, played down the impact of the decision, saying it won't make much of a difference. India currently enjoys $5.6 billion of duty-free exports to the US. The ministry also disputed Trump's claim that India is a high-tariff country, adding New Delhi's import tariffs on American goods are in line with World Trade Organization rates. After spending more than 3 months in a Japanese jail, the former boss of Nissan, Carlos Ghosn, has been granted bail. The Tokyo District Court set bail at 1 billion yen, that is just under $9 million after a request last week by Ghosn's newly appointed legal team. 2 previous requests for bail were rejected as the court saw him as a flight risk. The conditions for Tuesday's rulings are that he remains in Japan and be closely watched for any attempts to destroy evidence. The disgraced motor industry mogul has been charged with financial misconduct but has consistently denied any wrongdoing. Ghosn's release is not guaranteed, however. Prosecutors have appealed the ruling and could file additional charges to keep him detained. Forbes magazine has released its 33rd annual ranking of the world's billionaires. Just over 2,100 billionaires made this year's list, slightly lower than the year before. Their total combined net worth is $8.7 trillion. That is down from $9.1 trillion in 2018. This year marks the first decrease in billionaires and their combined wealth since 2016. One notable new addition is Kylie Jenner, who has become the world's youngest self-made billionaire, according to Forbes. The magazine has received a heap of criticism for dubbing the youngest member of the wealthy Kardashian family a self-made billionaire. Amazon CEO Jeff Bezos retains the top spot. A total of 40 Koreans, meanwhile, made the list, including Samsung Electronics chairman Lee Gun-hee.
Well, thank you as always to Arirang for the world news, and unfortunately we are out of time for now. Stay tuned to Arirang TV, more coming up, including our next newscast at noon Korea time. So until then, goodbye.
Planning a self-guided tour in Korea? We'll let you peek at the most beautiful hours from dawn to night in Korea. Come to Incheon, a city whose glistening morning is precious. Gyeonggi-do will make your heart throb. Come visit romantic Gyeongnam. Come to Pyeongchang, Korea's top winter destination. Come to Puyo for a memorable experience of history. Explore Busan, a city of mesmerizing waves and ocean. Visit Jeollabuk-do, a place straight out of a movie. Visit Chungcheongbuk-do, a quintessence of well-being tour. Come to Yeosu, a city with amazing